Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Learning Zone. I am Rob Jardine, and I am joined by my co-host, Rob Pierce. This is episode 7, and we're talking about a personal reality shift. And that sounds pretty serious. But before we get into that, let's get into you. Rob, how are you doing? What's news?
Hey Rob, how you doing? All good and excited. Week ahead. It's a weekend here, and it's Mother's Day. And yeah, spending a nice day with the family today, and looking forward to a week of a number of critical client meetings. And to some extent, I feel like the momentum in our country and broadly speaking across the globe has shifted somewhat. So a lot of our long-standing clients are requesting continuation of old work and some trying to address some new needs. So yeah, in this ever crazy world that we live in, I feel like things are progressing at a rate of knots. How about you?
Yeah, that's interesting. I actually saw an article on The Economist saying that there is now a post-pandemic economic boom. But I must be honest, I had read all my free articles for the month, so I couldn't read the whole article. But I did see that title, and post-pandemic economic boom, I think, sums it up quite nicely. I think people have really, I wouldn't say people have accepted our current reality, but they've at least got to a stage where they thought life must go on. We must still sell bank loans. We must still deliver food. We must still be, the astute insurance providers that we are. And we still haven't solved all the whole work from home hybrid model yet, but money still needs to flow through the economy, no matter how dire it may seem. So I think we're definitely seeing that in our space as well.
No doubt. I can see it in so many instances, and I just feel like everyone in our immediate sphere in South Africa seems to have relaxed to some extent. There's people out at restaurants. The roads are busier than they've been in over a year. I live close to a golf course in my suburb, and the golf course is fully booked. You can't get a golf booking these days. And you and I, when we frequent our local place for a weekly closeout drink, it's packed to the rafters, and it's not really that COVID friendly. So I don't know. It just seems like things are shifting to some extent.
Yeah, things are shifting just in time for the third wave, right? So I think it's just a reminder to be mindful of everything that we do. And yeah, I think let's not let complacency get into a more serious situation. But I'm glad you brought up actually our post-work drink. We often go to a golf club around the road here on a Friday afternoon, and that actually was a big part of why we started the podcast, because we realized that our best thinking, surprise, surprise, didn't happen around a boardroom table. And we'd often solve our most vexing corporate problems after a beer or two. And at least outside of their environment, that was, more traditionally where we would try and solve the problem around the meeting table. And I think that was kind of the energy we want to bring, and we're going to continue to bring in the Learning Zone, is creating that space where you can have a low stakes environment to discuss learning, to discuss mistakes, and to discuss issues that everyone's trying to get right now.
Yeah, we discussed that obviously in one of our initial episodes. We spoke about holistic well-being, but I think today was a lot more, as you said, it's more of a reflection type episode. And really, what are you doing and what are you prioritizing to make sure that you are your best self continually? And that you're prioritizing self-care and a lot more introspection and a look inward around what you can do to get infinitely better. It's also more relevant and more important now than ever, because for those of you that don't know, it's Mental Health Month internationally at the moment. And we really wanted to do this session on mental health as we all try to navigate this crisis. So it's a pressing piece. And I read an interesting article the other day that made mention of the fact that from the start of the pandemic, when I say start, there's obviously varying degrees of where it started and was its most aggressive in terms of contraction rates. But from about March last year till December, year-on-year comparisons to revenue and sales of self-care and self-development books were up 69% in America, and in South Africa up 70%. So it's showing that a lot of people are realizing that change is a constant, and this change is something that's occurred. And what's to say a change of this magnitude won't occur in the future? What do I do to make sure that I'm well prepared and well versed and astute or accomplished to navigate change more effectively when it does happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's so important to get right, and I think for a long time, people have been scared to talk about mental health. For those of you on the YouTube channel, you would have seen my very slick editing there to bring up a strapline that says "Mental health is wealth." And I think we really realized that during the pandemic. A lot of people, I think the pandemic's tightened a lot of screws for a lot of people and made them reflect on a lot of things around, is this job really about the money? Do I really, love my partner as I thought I did? Do I really want kids as bad? I don't know. I've been having a lot of interesting conversations in my network, I must say. And a lot of people are really having a different level of introspection. So much so that we actually have a coaching services division of the business, and they had their best year in about 10 years last year, with requests from corporates to have executive coaching and have access to a coach to help them, to have a thinking partner to help them think through a lot of things. And I think a lot of people are really being introspective. A lot of people are thinking a lot more deeper about things right now. I think the pandemic put things into perspective. And that's why we really want to dig into these personal reality shifts that people are dealing with. And I must say, I've been a huge mental health advocate all my life. So much so that's why I studied to be a psychologist. And there's not many people that would wear their profession on their sleeve. I actually do. I got my first tattoo in my 30s. For those on the YouTube channel, I'm showing it up right now. It's a small semicolon on my sleeve here, on my wrist. And I thought it was quite great. A semicolon is what an author would use to put a pause in a sentence, right? To say, this is not the end. Whatever you're going through, this is a moment in time. There's more to life. All these kind of great connotations for it. And I thought very meaningfully about it. I also thought that I would have to delete all the $5 a month apps on my phone for mental health and wellness, because I'll have that permanent reminder on my wrist to remind myself to be centered, to be mindful, to have a mindful pause. And I must say, after about a week of getting my first ever tattoo, I completely forgot it was there. So there's no more reminding of mindful moments, even with a tattoo literally on your wrist at all times. And I think that's something that we really want to get into today, is, also destigmatizing a bit of what we talk about with mental health. It can be anxiety and depression, but it's not that. Those are the extreme things, the things that make the headlines. But understanding our relationship with ourselves, and perhaps how that gets in the way or serves us.
Yeah, and we've said it time and time again, but the best relationship to work on is the relationship with yourself. And I think what you've touched on now is that many people, as you spoke to during this introspective time, and whilst we were in lockdown, is they started to assess, what can I do and what do I have control over? And what is important for me to do to make shifts that get me incrementally better over time and set me up for success for the rest of my time on this earth. And a lot of that is around, we've spoken to some extent in previous episodes, but a lot of the growth mindset principles that Carol Dweck speaks to is immense curiosity around what could you do to get better, but also around the concept of extreme ownership. And extreme ownership is quite a profound statement. For those of you who listen to Tim Ferriss, who Rob and I are immense fans of and have been following for some time, he speaks about a number of his key, within his key network, people he's worked closely with, people like Jocko Willink and the like, who talk about extreme ownership. And if you as an individual can stop blaming things within your immediate sphere and in your environment for your where you find yourself, but rather take full ownership and accountability for everything you can control, you're likely to set yourself up for success, because that's all we can do in this world, is put our best foot forward every single day and control what we can, not what happens to us.
Yeah, I love when we were talking about extreme ownership in the last 2 weeks. It was really provocative, and it actually reminded me of a post I did about a year or two ago. I reshared a meme, and that's probably about 50% of what I do in a day is resharing memes and then resharing scientific articles that about 5 of my friends actually read. And the one meme I shared, it said basically something along the lines of, hold the person accountable for your crappy life. It's you. And it drew quite a provocative response from a lot of the people in my network as well. And I don't think it was the best, suited for people that have severe mental challenges around, anxiety and depression and suicide. And it was never meant in that light, but it was also shared in the light of around extreme ownership to really put into perspective most of what happens in life we can't really control. And I think the pandemic really underlined that statement for a lot of us. And if you try and put your happiness, your self-worth, your sense of fulfillment in things that are external or without your sphere of influence, you're always going to be anxious. You're always going to be uncertain. But if you can't control things that are happening to you, you can control your interpretation of them. And it's just another great example is I after quite some time of trying to lose weight, I managed to lose about 8 kgs since about January of this year. And it was very interesting, me feeling quite sad and depressed at the end of 2020, being quite overweight, the heaviest I've been. And I was really lamenting to my partner at how depressed it's made me and how I feel terrible and all these, sad emotions. And then she said to me just quite honestly, well, do the 7 craft beers on a Saturday help you lose that weight? And I was like, first of all, quite angry, embarrassed, taken back. But then after a while, I was like, I have no right to be sad. I am the one having, carb heavy craft beers, maybe having an extra chop at the braai. When I go to order something, am I consciously choosing a salad or am I always choosing the burger because it's convenient and cheaper? And, I think a lot of people are looking for something to blame or someone or the situation because it's harder to be more mindful of what you can control, either from your actions and the small things you do every day that take it closer to your ideal self, or are you part of your own situation that you're so sad about as well? And I completely agree what I've just said won't apply to everyone in every situation, but it's a good conversation to have to really, shift the focus of relationships that you have with people to the relationship you have with yourself.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned it also, is that the person we talk to the most during the day is ourselves. And is that voice enabling you to be better, or is it deterring you from getting to your ideal self? And, the one thing that we've spoken to a lot of our clients is the science around embedding new habits and behaviors and ensuring sustained change over time. And if you're looking to take care of yourself and be the best version of yourself every day, there's basically 3 simple rules. And those 3 simple rules align to how do you embed a habit you want to see more of that becomes unconsciously competent. And where we move from something that's you struggle with day in and day out and try to make sense of and decipher with through your prefrontal cortex, where you move it through your hippocampus into your limbic system and it becomes something you just do naturally. And that can take anywhere from a month to 3 months, but are you prioritizing it? Are you placing immense value on that every single day to get you to where you need to be? So the first is we talk about prioritization. What are you going to prioritize? And what time are you going to set aside to make sure that comes to light? The second is the habits. What habits will enable you to take the best care of yourself and to set you up for success? And we typically talk to no more than 3, because when you talk to more than 3 or you prioritize more than 3, it can become a bit blurry and a bit gray, and you're not sure what to do when. So try and stick to 3, and we're going to look at some tactics coming up now. And the last is systems. The system, and that system can be any system, any shape and form. It can be a system you set up to support the habits that you've prioritized over time, whether that be through the technology you use and applications, It could be something you set up on your daily planner, whether that's on Microsoft Teams or Outlook or your Gmail, or it's a system you set up as a reminder in your day to do what you need to do. And I think we all, as we've said now, Rob, are accountable for the change we want to see. All you need to do is commit wholeheartedly to bringing that to life through prioritization within your day. Everyone, often says, I'm too busy to do the things I want to do. Well, make time. There's 24 hours in a day. Make that time. What are those 2 or 3 habits that are going to turn the dial and make a significant difference in what you're looking to prioritize? And what system can you put in place that makes it come to life? And I think we've got so many examples of that within the corporate space, but it sounds simple and it isn't simple, but if you put those 3 things in place, it's likely to come to light.
Yeah, there's a couple things that I want to layer on there. The first thing is around self-talk. And what we have been touching on in previous episodes is our brain's natural negativity bias. Our default is often, in some ways, 4 times more likely to be negative than positive. That's why we are often our own worst critic. We often make up stories in our heads about how bad things really are when they're not as bad. Maybe someone wouldn't say the same. And if you don't, and if you can't relate with that, just think about the last time you spoke or led something in a meeting and you thought that went terrible. But if you had to ask any one of the audience members, they would tell a very different story around that. And that's why there's so much work around gratitude and journaling to overcome that negativity bias. I actually read something the other day. I still have to find, if it's completely, scientifically valid, but it was interesting. It was from a neuroscientist, and he said that we have almost 70 to 80,000 thoughts in a day, and 80% of them are the same as yesterday. So that often is the same narrative that you're walking around with. If you don't believe you're good at this thing, if you believe you have baggage, it's going to show up. It's going to color the lens that you view the world, and inevitably, it links to the saying that we don't see the world as it is; we see it as we are. So if I have a problem with status and authority, I'm going to be rewarded and motivated to have a higher status and a higher position of authority, and will be more threatened than others if my status or authority is challenged. And that introspection is what a lot of people are doing to uncover what are their lenses, because those are the lenses, those are their relationships with themselves that, for the guys that have solved it, are thriving and are flourishing. And for those that haven't solved it, they're still walking around with those blind spots as well.
Yeah, and I think we spoke about, the growth in a lot of these self-help books and of thought leaders providing insight into self-care. And one of the things I've found really profound, not only in some of the books I've read of late, but a common theme across all of the really good books I've read in the last 4 months has been living in a state of gratitude and operating in gratitude daily. Because, we're on this life's journey, and it's going to throw curveballs at us, and it's going to challenge us. We have to accept that. It's how we respond to those curveballs and those challenges that helps us succeed, because success is directly linked to failure. All of the greatest pioneers in our lifetime have spoken that their greatest failings have enabled them to improve drastically over time. And I think if we can be gratuitous in most of what we do, whether that's through journaling or acknowledging at the end of every day what we're grateful for and how blessed we are right now, we're able to put our best foot forward every single day. And on a recent podcast that you and I both listened to, because we're avid listeners, it's amazing that you acknowledge this individual spoke about, he's a well-respected sports person. He says, you do get what you don't deserve more often than you'll acknowledge, and you don't get what you do deserve often. And so I think that's really, really powerful, is acknowledge what you have been given and how grateful you can be for what you have. And then put your best foot forward every single day. And over time, through effort, endeavor, focus, and as we've said, curiosity, you'll likely get over time what you do deserve.
Yeah, I love what you've said there, Rob. Even though I need a lot more time just to reflect on that, on that comment. My interpretation, and this also is actually a big part of our feedback from the last session, is not always to agree with what each one says, but my interpretation of my lens, I don't think is the same, but I think it's valuable. And my interpretation is back to that negativity bias, is that we need to do work to overcome it. And a lot of it comes from, reflecting on the things that we take for granted, right? I mean, that's my takeaway out of that, and I'm sticking to it. If I just reflect on maybe being frustrated for the next 12 months, I can't book an overseas trip, for example, and I'm like really, I can get really depressed and bummed about that. But I was reflecting last night when I was looking at a few places, and vaccines and everything else was a calamity. But I was just thinking, in my 20s, I lived in about 5 countries. I lived in Cuba. I lived in Mexico. Not just toured. I lived, and then I lived in Spain, Germany, America, and lived and worked and did all these amazing things. And I completely forgot about that. All I could think about was the next 12 months. Poor me, 12 months. I can't travel to a different country. Yet, I got to live in Cuba before some of the trade embargoes stopped, and that time period can never be had again. But that is not front of mind for me. That's other people would, break their legs to do that, which would be a terrible holiday, to be in a wheelchair on the beach with that, just thinking about it. But we are so quick to forget, right? We're so quick to forget about the things that we take for granted. We even get tattoos on our wrists that maybe will be a reminder. But that negativity bias, which comes from our oversensitive threat network in the brain, which is good. It keeps us alive. It makes sure that when we're at a watering hole, we're always watching for lions that might be able to get us when we're vulnerable. But we don't have watering holes to worry about anymore. But that brain network is still getting in the way. And I really think that that's a big part of our relationship with ourselves, and overcoming that negativity bias with gratitude, and reflecting on, do I talk to myself in the same way that I would talk to a friend?
That's really, really powerful. And Rob, you've touched on something that's so important to me, is that we don't, in living in a world or operating in a space of gratitude, is we don't acknowledge where we find ourselves now and live in the present. We're always chasing that next goal and trying to evolve into the person we think the world wants us to be and who we think we should be, rather than just acknowledging where we are right now. And I often relate it closely to, when I used to do a lot of, big endurance events, Ironmans and the Absa Cape Epic and various long-winded events where I would have to train for 6 months in preparation for them. But having completed the race and really got to the end and thought, wow, after all of it, I thought this was an impossible feat. But as the race finishes, what I really, really valued was the journey. It wasn't the end result. It was the period, all the ups and downs and all of the sacrifices I had to make, the time invested, the early mornings at 4 a.m. riding with my partner who I did some of these stage races with, and what it enabled me to find out about myself and my limitations and my strengths, and how much better I was for it. And it's amazing. Only in reflection was I able to acknowledge how great those journeys were.
Yeah, and for those listeners that are dialed in case you missed it, yes, we both were boasting. I've lived in 5 countries, and Rob is an Ironman athlete. So just in case no one got how much we were boasting there about our personal lives. But I think it's so hard to slow down, right? And it's so hard to be more mindful of that, and that's going to be a key to really help us for success. So, I do want to shift us to get into more of, how we can focus on the practical ways we can experiment around this, right? We've really understood that people are being more introspective, interrogating the relationship with themselves. There's definitely an overwhelming negativity bias. There is a lot around practicing gratitude as well. And there's often been a huge rise in self-help books. I know you've read quite a number this year, Rob. I think you contributed to that financial growth for that market quite some time. But I know you wanted to share, as is customary with each episode, what are some, habits and practices we can start experimenting with to maybe better solve our relationships with ourselves.
Sure. Yeah, and I think there we just wanted to touch on three essential tactics for self-care and self-improvement, and Rob, elaborate on them, because we've ourselves tried to apply them in many different ways. But I think the first one is called the tight bubble of total focus, and it's a really, it sounds very simple, but it's amazing how we don't do this often enough, particularly with the amount of technology and digital distraction we have in our days. Is we need to try and preserve our focus by giving ourselves specific time to do the things we want to achieve. Because with the amount of distraction in our world today, particularly with the amount of technology that we use, we need to really focus intently on the things we want to achieve and the things we want to turn the dial on. And without doing that, essentially we become, with the amount of distraction, is we don't commit wholeheartedly our best thinking and use the best parts of our brain, our prefrontal cortex, that's already taxed in so many different ways and is only able to function its best for 20% of the day. We don't give it its best chance to set us up for success. So the tight bubble of total focus is around locking yourselves into a world of practicing and immersing yourself in what you want to achieve for a sustained period of time without distraction in the cyber world we live in, because that's going to really set you up for success.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting piece around that as well, is people do deal with a lot of emotions and anxiety because they are working harder than they ever have. And a lot of stats are showing that across the board, but they're not getting enough done. And I think that just that creates compounding interest of mental ill health, almost in a way. And that's where I'm so excited about this tight bubble of total focus that you've uncovered. And it also talks about limiting distractions because, as I mentioned earlier, there's almost two parts of the brain that help us with attention. One is task focused. The other part is consistently scanning the environment for a lion about to attack us while we're drinking at the watering hole. We don't worry about physical lions anymore, but the emotional ones are still quite scary. And one of the worst things is our damn cell phones, these ring, pings, and tings. And how often do we say, okay, great, I'm going to focus now, I'm going to close all my applications, and then I start working, but my cell phone's on my desk on vibrate, and then lo and behold, a few minutes later, we had to check a buzz from our partner, and now we're on Instagram without even thinking. And there's some very interesting stuff that we might get to into the next episodes around procrastination and being indistractable from one of my famous psychologists there. But they often say that your distractions are really distracting you from yourself or from the unease that you have with a lot of these tasks. And how many times do you actually just lean in with extreme ownership and say, yeah, okay, great, this email is not going great, or this is taking me a lot harder than I thought, rather than going into Instagram or Facebook or whatever our vices are. Sometimes it's like Sudoku. How often do we just lean in and say, this is uncomfortable, but I'm not going to allow something else to distract me from that feeling as well. I'm going to lean in. And I think a great way to do that is that tight bubble of focus, putting the cell phone in a desk, in a drawer, and just committing to that period.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly it. And it's actually a principle that Robin Sharma speaks about in his 5 a.m. club, and many of our listeners may have read it or not, but I found it really insightful. The tactic was what he calls the 90-91 rule. And it's around, what are you prioritizing? What is the one thing that you really want to be more effective at, or you want to achieve over a period of time? And we know it takes between 20 and 66 days to embed a new habit. But that's why he's built it that way. It's based on neuroscience principles, is that you need to, for 90 consecutive days, apportion 90 minutes at the beginning of your day, when your prefrontal cortex is able to function at its best. It's your executive brain, that thin layer in the front of your skull, to focus on that one goal. And he talks about, for 90 days, if you do those 90 minutes every single day without distraction, in that tight bubble of total focus, you have what's called a compounding effect. You're going to make significant strides in achieving your desired outcome or goal. Because without that distraction, you're able to immerse yourself wholeheartedly. He almost actually says you should take your mobile phone, put it in a black bag labeled 9091, and lock it in a cupboard for those 90 minutes whilst you're working on it at the beginning of your day. So I found that quite aggressive, but I think it does result in the change you want to see. And sometimes we need to hold ourselves. We spoke of extreme ownership. Hold yourself to account, because I know I'm terrible with my phone.
And that almost gives me anxiety just thinking about it. And that actually is scary, that I should feel so worried about not living with my, augmented arm, which is often what our cell phones have become, for 90 minutes. I'll also disagree with you there in a healthy way, to say that, not everyone has the capacity right now to do 90 minutes for 90 days. And that's often why a lot of people give up after a week, is that they set the lofty goal of 90 minutes for 90 days. And I think it is achievable and it is right, but we should also be careful to go easy on ourselves if we don't do it. And I think Robin Sharma does mention that in the book as well, is that I think there are a few conditions to get it right at 5 a.m., but if you don't do all of them every morning, it's not a failure. And that's one of the biggest reasons why people are not consistent. It's because consistency is what's going to breed that that final output. And if people after a week aren't seeing that progress, they give up. But if we make the goals a bit smaller sometimes, rather than doing 10 minutes of mindfulness every day using an app, which is out of reach for most people, but rather just changing that to every time I boil the kettle, breathing in and breathing out 5 times. I mean, that's achievable. And then once you've built that consistent base, to move forward from there, because at the end of the day in the brain, we grow new habits through repetition. And you want to make sure that you set up for success to repeat those habits. And one of the ways is, as you've said, with minimizing distractions, but also really interrogate what's practical and what's achievable to build consistent success in your current setup as well.
Yeah. And then as we come to the end, the last 2 tactics are pretty simple and they sound obvious, but they have made a significant
I love those kinds
impact.
of tactics, by the way. I love those.
Yeah.
Simple and obvious. Perfect. You had me at hello. Carry on.
But that's what we know. We need, from a neuroscience standpoint, to make things simple, but they are obvious. But people, once again, we spoke about this in the learning zone, people don't apply what they should. And why is that occurring? And the third is the 60-10 method or tactic. And as we work in this virtual world, we've spoken it in previous episodes, we're working for prolonged periods of time and we are fatigued more often than we care to acknowledge it. And so the 60-10 method is simply, if you are working for 60 minutes continuously or focusing on something for that period of time, you have to take 10 minutes to replenish. It's that principle of oscillation. Yeah. And simply put, it's take a 10-minute break. That can be a walk. It can be a walk down to the local cafeteria, to the cafe, to make yourself a cup of tea. It can be to stop looking at your laptop, close it, and put on some of your favorite music and just stop what you're doing. It can be a deep breathing exercise. We talk of that 5 seconds in, really fill your diaphragm, hold it for 5 seconds, 5 minutes out. 5 seconds out. 5 minutes. 5 minutes would be a challenge. I think we'd see a deep ocean dive.
Definitely put a health warning on this podcast as well. Don't breathe out for 5 minutes, please. And also, Rob and Rob are not liable. We're not liable. Thanks.
We're not liable for any of that. But and then some visualization. So simple 60-10. And if you're working for 8 hours, you should probably spend more of that 60-10, more than 10 minutes probably replenishing. And then the last one was, I love this tactic of self-care, is learning about self-care and learning about what you want to learn so that you can get infinitely better. And it's basically the 60-minute student, where within your day, with us focused on trying to unwind, watching TV or scanning through our phone when we switch off, how are you becoming a lifelong student? And I've seen this through many of my close friends who've done tremendous things in their career paths. But, you know, one of my friends, I've known him since I was 5 years old. He basically, when he moved back from abroad, from the States, him and his wife agreed that they would own no TVs in their house. Now, I know that sounds drastic because it sounds terrible, but him and his wife commit to reading in bed between 60 and 90 minutes a night. And his wealth of knowledge over the last 10 years is astounding. And it's surpassed every expectation I thought of. And, you know, he's functioning on another level. And I think if you want to get better in the things that you care most about, if it's self-care and if it's managing this crazy and uncertain world, what can you commit to learning that will make you that much better?
Yeah, and it's amazing. We put so much emphasis on going to Harvard or getting into masters, or we're always impressed if someone has a PhD, right? They sound pretty intelligent, but would we ever consider having a PhD in knowledge of self or self-awareness? And I think that's what a lot of people have shifted to during the pandemic. We've seen that in the rise of our coaching business. And a lot of people are thinking a lot more mindfully and a lot deeper around career choices, relationship choices, and daily choices that we make every day.
Great. Well, thanks for a great episode, Rob. It's quite interesting doing this on a Sunday. I feel like having really, really wound down and relaxed a bit this weekend. That I was stuttering and stammering over my words and thinking ahead around how I'm going to spoil my wife and the family this weekend with Mother's Day today. But thanks to our listeners, and we've got some exciting, inspiring leader episodes coming up in the near future, which I'm excited for.
Yeah, looking very much forward to profiling some new and exciting people from around the world and locally, and we look forward on taking everyone on the journey with us. Goodbye for now.
Ciao.